Hi, Nick.
I try.
Welcome, everybody. We are live with Nick Wilson. And we're just going to wait a few moments here for folks to join, and then we will get started. We are seeing some excerpts from Nick's video series, A Dying Hare, which we are launching today at Remai Modern. Great to see so many people checking it out. I'm going to flip the camera here and introduce myself. My name is Troy Gronsdahl. I am the curator of performance and public practice at Remai Modern. Thanks everyone for being with us today, and welcome. As I mentioned, we are launching a new project by artist Nick Wilson. It is the latest in our RBC Emerging Artist series, and as we'll learn today, Nick has a multifaceted practice that takes many forms, including video, performance, artist books, as well as a writing practice that includes criticism, essays, poetry, life writing. And as I mentioned, we're launching his project with a video series called A Dying Hare. So this is a series of videos that is on view on screens located throughout the museum. We started it in the darkest days here of winter, and we'll continue it through till March. So today we're going to talk to Nick a little bit about his practice, elaborate on some of the ideas in his videos. I think we'll find connections to other forms that he works in as well. So we'll probably talk about his books and performance practice. But to start, I just wanted to thank Nick, congratulate him on his launching his new project here at Remai Modern, and say a few words of welcome.
Thanks, Troy.
So we saw a little bit of the video series there, A Dying Hare. Do you want to describe it for our viewers? While perhaps I'll flip my camera around and give them a bit of a taste.
Sure. So this series of videos are, each one focuses on a different shaped candle that I found, and it started with the first one, I think that what you saw, which was a really deranged looking rabbit with a bushel of apples in its arms. And it was inspired by a painting by Jan Wenix, who is at, which is at the Art Gallery of Ontario. And the painting has this kind of like splayed rabbit hanging from an urn. And I always thought that these types of still life images were really like gothy and kind of interesting connections to ideas about death. And that's a subject that I've been interested in for a long time. And the videos themselves are, the length of them is determined by the time it takes to for a candle to burn itself out. So I was interested in the way that you could potentially view this as a lifespan, from its ignition to its self-immolation, with one notable exception in the video series, which threatened my life and the life of the studio, so it had to be put out. But yeah,
the hazard, the occupational hazard of working with fire.
Yeah, too reactive. But yeah, but in total, that series of videos is about 7 hours long. And I think that there's 6 segments. And they range in time from, I think, about like 7 minutes to 2.5 hours.
Yeah, so these are long videos.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit of, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say they kind of like disrupt the boundary between moving and still image, which is something that I've always been interested in, like videos that are themselves single images that move very slowly throughout an idea, or not. I think like their videos are kind of inspired by like Andy Warhol's 8-hour-long videos of the same thing.
We talked a little bit about structuralist film. There are kind of many references folded into this series that are some are kind of playful. I believe you may have described structuralist film, which is the sort of avant-garde filmmaking from the 60s that sort of perhaps was known for some of its more demanding kind of forms, let's say. I think you said it maybe was willfully obtuse or boring.
I think so, yeah.
So there's sort of playful references to art historical sort of precedents, including structuralist film, but also the references to still life, I think, are quite interesting. There's a lot of references built into this body of work, and I know that in your writing you often bring together these somewhat disparate ideas into and hold them in kind of proximity to kind of create or build on ideas. So while you probably don't need to know about structuralist film to appreciate this video series, there's sort of a kind of cheeky reference to that I think art history nerds would particularly like.
Yeah. And also I once did an artist talk, and there was a filmmaker in the audience who was kind of like, these don't follow the tenets of structuralist film. Like they don't have like the kind of hallmarks. And I think that that's always like a reference point. Like I'm not trying to engage in that long past type of filmmaking, but because like so much of it was about like the materiality of film itself, and these are very much like digital videos, but ones that were very hard to make because of the long single uninterrupted cut, which really I don't know if you could make in a form other than a digital video.
You'd have to keep changing the reels.
Yeah, you need a lot of cameras. But I like, in terms of these references, I was on a bad date once, and trying to describe my writing to someone who I don't think was fully sold on the idea of literature at all. But I said that they were kind of like poetic Wikipedia entries, where they had all of these like references and linkages to other things. And that kind of like that connectivity between ideas is something that's always really important to me. And also like stretching the kind of like rational boundaries of what connection is, and sometimes making leaps that seem either absurd or really just based in my own like neuroses or something like that, rather than thinking about what should be able to be connected. So there's a lot of like faith in those connections.
Yeah, there's sort of an idiosyncratic kind of way that you're pulling this material together that wouldn't otherwise kind of happen. Yeah.
And it's like mostly just the product of a restless mind. Like I think it's not I think it's like a reflection of anxiety more than a lot of like intellectual intention. It comes from not being able to focus or like sit on one idea for very long, but also finding that in that movement I return to things over and over again. Like though I like stray very far, I always come back to like a core set of ideas, almost like against my own will. Like
Mm.
it sometimes feels like you're trying to get out of like a whirlpool. And the only way to navigate that is to keep moving, but you're always kind of in the same place.
Mm. Does part of that relate to maybe the like proliferation of sort of content and just this saturation of images and media and kind of culture that we produce?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. Like, I was having a conversation with an artist a couple of years ago, and he was like, "So you're kind of a traditionalist, right?" In a way that that it felt like it came out of left field, but I do, I make drawings, and I maybe like the form of the things that I do could be seen as a little bit traditional, but it's all about like the kind of like media saturation that I grew up in particularly and that I exist in now. It's like a lot of it has to do with like advertising imagery, and the idea of like a sort of like an object in isolation.
Right.
And yeah.
But then, you know,
Also just, oh, sorry.
you're bringing these like really somewhat disparate references and creating new associations. So in this video series, for example, we talked about the references to structuralist film or cinema.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about still life references, which I think actually are kind of reinforced by this kind of like this sort of sad passing that I get from like watching these videos, which are both like totally charming and but also have this sort of poignant and kind of in an unexpected way. Watching this little rabbit like melt away,
Mm-hmm.
standing there so stoically as it melts to oblivion. We also talked about, and I think this relates to your writing practice, but you talked about scrying.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Do you want me to
Sure.
provide some? I'll provide the material.
Perfect. Everyone gaze into the flame and contemplate.
Unfix your eyes.
Mm-hmm. Try and stare beyond the flame. Yeah, I think like I mean, like scrying is a form of divination. Most people know it as like crystal ball gazing or using a black mirror, or like staring into candle flame is one of the lesser known, less popular forms of scrying. But I think that I'm really interested in the aspect of like the aspect of scrying which is about contemplation and looking and the connection between like looking at things and contemplating them. And I think that that runs through a lot of the work that I do. And I'm also interested in, but also quite suspicious about the supposed historical lineage of scrying. Like some people say that it's a kind of like pre-Christian idea that's been sort of clandestinely passed as like a heretical practice. And then other people have talked about the way that it is like a totally 19th century practice that kind of came about at the same time as like spiritualism and other other ways of thinking about like the dead and the beyond. And I thought it was kind of interesting that in the Wikipedia article for scrying, the image that's used is a painting, like a Pre-Raphaelite painting, which is like an art historical movement of the 19th century, which has a lot of nostalgia kind of like pre-built into it.
Mm-hmm.
And those ideas of things being old or being made to look old is kind of a point of fascination for me.
Mm-hmm.
Just about the indeterminacy of history and how certain ideas can kind of present themselves as very ancient, but are in actual fact like complete modern conventions. And yeah, so I'm interested in that lack of clarity.
Cool. I think too, like, I'm not like an art historian by training, but thinking about sort of this renewed interest in the occult, and thinking about sort of, you know, during the kind of early modernist period, this sort of similar kind of interest in the occult, seances and Ouija boards, and like kind of trying to communicate with like the spiritual realm. And if it, you know, I think some of it was related to sort of an anxiety around technology and sort of, I guess, whatever crises of that moment. It feels like maybe there's an echo happening now.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I think now, my friend Becky,
shout out to Becky.
Yeah, hi Becky. She once said to me that she thought TikTok was kind of like this oracle that she stared into, where it would like something about the algorithm like fed back an idea of oneself that could be like interpreted or like read in some way. And I think that that's really similar to the way that people, especially like queer people, talk about astrology. And also at one of my favorite YouTubers, Natalie Wynn, talked about the way that psychoanalysis was astrology for straight people, which I thought was really funny, like another like early modern tie-in. But all of these practices they kind of like seek to intuit something about the self and about the world that is beyond a certain type of reason. And I think that all those things are like that. The practices themselves and also the impulse toward those practices are deeply interesting to me.
Your video presentation at Remai Modern also includes a piece of writing. So, as I mentioned, Nick also makes these wonderful little artist books, which I have a few of with me. If people want to learn more about these, where should they go?
I think Art Metropole has all of them at the moment.
Nice. Cool.
But also they're available as PDFs on my website, which is nicwilson.org.
Nice.
So if you're interested in the physical books, you can get them at Art Metropole, or if you're just interested in the text, they're on my website.
Well, they're absolutely gorgeous little books. And I'd like to invite you to read Small Fires, which is the text that we included in your exhibition at Remai Modern.
Sure. Okay. So this is a short essay from a collection called What I Saw, which was produced for a show at the Art Gallery of Regina. This is called Small Fires. A white candle brings peace. Black, protection. Green, growth. Red, strength. A yellow candle brings the light of the sun, intelligence, and good memory. A candle with a black flame lit by a virgin brings witches. A candle can be cleansed by passing a knife through its flame, burying it in salt, or leaving it in moonlight. One can stare into a candle flame to see through deception. Looking further can reveal the future. If you watch a candle burn itself out, you will be granted one wish. Between 1982 and 1983, Gerhard Richter made 23 paintings of candles. 2 were later overpainted. The year I was born, Sonic Youth put one of Richter's candles on the cover of Daydream Nation. A black marriage candle has 2 wicks and is burned at the separation of a couple to symbolize the dissolution of their union. Soak the pith of an alder branch in tallow to make a rushlight and burn it from both ends for maximum light. Keep several tapers on hand for emergencies and tea lights for fondue. At the end of the Han Dynasty, the general Dongzhu seized the control of the capital and then retreated to Chang'an, where he led a vicious reign of terror. After months of maniacal torture and lavish feasting, he was assassinated by a group of his generals, and his body was left in the city of the streets. It is said that a wick was placed in his belly button, which burned on his fat, as bright as the light of the sun, for several days.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I maybe put you on the spot. Please read your text.
No, it's good. There are like those texts are assembled in such a they're assembled in such a research driven way, where I kind of write them as I'm researching and then often forget the details that are involved and the connections that I was kind of bringing as I was writing them. So it's always interesting to revisit and be like, oh, there were reasons for all of these things that I totally forgot about.
So one of the things that I'm quite excited about is that you will be producing a new book through this project. Do you want to talk a little bit? I know you've been giving it some thought and started some work on it. Can you share some secrets about what
Sure.
you expect?
Well, it's very, very much still in process, but I know that one of the things that I'm interested in it kind of comes from my drawing practice. And a lot of my drawing is about negative space and drawing the area around objects, which comes from kind of like a lot of things that my mother has told me. She was very involved in the women's movement, kind of like second wave feminism. And she often talked about the ways that her engagement with those discourses made the air visible. And that's an idea that has kind of like followed me throughout my practice. And I'm always interested in the invisible structures that kind of reveal themselves through contemplation. And I think a lot of that also is about queerness and the way that my experience of like divergent sexuality and gender has kind of revealed the contours of certain structures in my life. And so a lot of that is kind of analogized to this negative space drawing, which I call like inversion, which is an early term in a sort of like Eurocentric context for thinking about homosexual desire. And so that kind of like leads to an interest in holes and porousness and boundaries. And again, this book work is a way of like stretching that idea and seeing how far it can be brought. And so the book is about negative space and holes, and also this branch of theology called negative theology or apophatic theology, which is thinking about the way that one can describe God in a limited language. And the thinking is that like in this branch of Christian theology, if God is limitless, the only way to talk about them in a limited language is to say what God is not. So it's this kind of idea of pulling description inside out, which I think is really interesting. And those connections aren't necessarily rational. Like the connection between these ideas, like they're all, associated, but I don't think that you can draw a straight line between them. And that's not something that my practice is very interested in doing. So there's a lot of like leaps of faith.
Yeah, and I was thinking too, like, so there's while your work is engaging these like almost like philosophical kind of lines of thought, there's also like a playfulness in it that I think I really appreciate. Do you want to talk
Mhm.
about how you might use humor or even, I don't know if playfulness is the right term, but you want to talk a little bit about that in your work?
Sure. I think definitely a lot of the subjects that I'm drawn to kind of like flirt with a type of seriousness that I that kind of like makes my, it just like causes me anxiety because it's humorless and kind of like doesn't delve into the absurdity of certain types of lived experience, and keeping the connection to perhaps like a very dry or like droll sense of humor is like something that's always interested me, and something that I also need to keep going with a lot of these projects.
Mm-hmm.
And I also like, not to get into sort of like what humor is, but there are like the logic of certain comedians is very interesting to me. Like what the incongruity of a lot of absurd comedy is. It's not just sort of like smashing two rocks together and hoping for a spark. There's a kind of like practice or a logic to humor that I'm really interested in. And without it, I don't think the work would be worth doing for me.
Mm-hmm.
It would just be too serious. I don't know.
Yeah. But I mean, if you're also in a way kind of undermining the like some of these um, not thought traditions, almost like thought habits or habits of thought or like ways of thinking about the world that are they seem um, fixed,
Mm-hmm.
and you're kind of demonstrating that there's sort of this, they're not fixed, and that they are inventions and can be manipulated and played with
Mm-hmm.
and used like material. And
Yeah, and I think like the seriousness of certain institutions is what um, gives them power sometimes. Like the the idea of like humor or laughter as being inherently disruptive to a space that takes itself too seriously is also something that I'm drawn to, but also just kind of like feel pulled toward.
mm-hmm.
Like, um, yeah, the impulse to like laugh at inappropriate moments or something like that.
Of course, the institutions of art would not be implicated in this in any way.
No, not at all. They're never too serious. They never take themselves too seriously.
um, Before we wrap up, I also we're working towards a performance that also, I mean, it's macabre, it's absurd, it's a bit bizarre, maybe a bit absurd. Do you want to talk a little bit about the performance that we're thinking about presenting in the spring, and maybe talk a bit about your performance practice more broadly?
Sure. I think like in the way it is now, performance is kind of my newest thing. Um, I did a performance workshop with an American artist named Marilyn Arsom in Regina, and her work is very durational. It's very repetitive. It's very much about like considering the many dimensions of a single action. Um, and I think the one that really got me was a performance that she did where she gathered with an audience, and then they sat in silence and waited for the sun to rise. And it's like, so, and she was like, I think it's sort of like dangerously minimal, which
Mhm.
is also like a concept that I'm drawn to. And so thinking about what an action means as it unfolds many times, at each time becoming new in some way, the sort of like Shaggy Dog humor of it, where it's funny, and then it's annoying, and then it's sad, and then it's funny again, and then it's like going through all of those like cycles of interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
So the first and then like after that workshop, I went to another workshop with her where I presented a performance called He Loves Me, which was again, I have this like ongoing kind of interest in flowers, gay, and the performance was me picking single petals from a flower. For the first time I did it, I think it was like 3 hours and 45 minutes. And there was this sort of like absurd pile of flowers beside me, and I would just pick them. And other things happened. I sort of like got bored and sort of like propositioned is the wrong word, but like interacted with.
You're improvising a bit.
Yeah. I went off script. I left the room. I made someone else sit in my place and pick petals, and I went and got a bottle of wine, and anyway, but like the main action was this kind of obsessive pulling of petals, and so to continue on that kind of trajectory, I'm doing a kind of like a new take on those books. It's like going to be like the third in a series, and it goes along with a performance called Spray, which is a very large casket spray, which is a funeral arrangement that sits on top of a casket and is kind of like almost like a surrogate body on a closed casket. It drapes it from head to foot. It's very large, and the performance is me disassembling this this casket spray into individual boutonnieres and bouquets and giving them out to audience members. And it's just a way of thinking about dispersal and kind of like how parts of a person are dispersed, not necessarily bodily, but like emotionally or intellectually. And it's about grieving as a communal act, which is also like, they're kind of absurd objects in and of themselves. You know, like I like the idea of a flower arrangement so large that it's like hard to move by yourself. And there's this kind of community driven thing in it. But yeah, that's the kind of performance I'm working on. And I think that the idea of duration kind of runs from those videos into performance in a way that is not necessarily about viewing something from start to finish, but about maybe catching something in the middle and moving away from it, or coming back and then away. Like it's not like the videos are not movies, and the performance is not theater. They're things that you come to and interact with and then move away, kind of like the way you know people, which is just for like specific pools of time.
That's such a touching thought. I think we're going to wrap up soon.
Sure.
I want to thank you so much for elaborating on your work, your connection to ideas, and your engagement with ideas is one of the aspects of your work that I just find so pleasurable, but also your engagement with humor and your playfulness. There's a sort of generosity in that, I think, too, that the viewers, I hope, will appreciate. So Nick Wilson, his exhibition is A Dying Hare. It's on view at Remai Modern through March 6th. I'd like to invite people to come view it. We're open from 10 to 5 Wednesdays, starting Wednesdays through the weekend. We're open late on Fridays. And we're even open on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. So if you have some time during the holidays, come spend some time with Nick's charming, poignant videos. And I guess follow us along on RemaiModern.org for more information about his upcoming artist book and performance. And of course, if you want to find out more about Nick's practice, you can visit his website at nickwilson.org. That's Nick, N-I-C, Wilson.org. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Have a safe and happy holiday. And thank you so much, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Troy. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Okay, take care. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.